Party people in the house. Okay, party people in the house. You're about to witness something you've never witnessed before. Boom, 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 boom. Man, oh man. Well, this past week, I had the privilege of going with my three sons, and we went to a friend of mine who owns a beach house in Outer Banks. Love this brother, man. Lets me and my family go there every year for free. Just lets us have this beach house. And so we go to this place. It's usually me. Well, it was me and my sons, my three sons. We went, hung out, had a great time. But I was tracking, I didn't make any videos. I actually planned to make a video or two there, but it just didn't happen. And thank you for some of you who reached out, like, hey, where you at, Unc? Where you been? Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for the couple people who leave. Whenever I don't post a video every couple of days, I lose some subscribers. I'll never get to 5,000. Well, it is what it is. But I've been paying attention, as many of you have, to what's going on in the culture. And as I watch these things, I don't really hear, and I'm sure there are people who do it, I just don't hear any believers weigh in on these topics. Like, we almost act like being in the world but not of the world means we ignore what's happening in the world. So, or how we should process it, because we're affected by all these things, right? So let's have a conversation about Trump's tariffs. Let's talk about tariffs. If you have been watching the media, at first, initially, I would have said, well, depending on who you ask, like, it would have been a political thing. It's a very political thing, right? So if you'd have asked the right, they would have been like, oh, the left, this is the left conspiracy. They're going to be fine. This is a trade tactic. If you ask the right that, if you ask the left, oh my gosh. But now that things have kind of taken course, you're realizing, wow, it's not the left who are complaining about tariffs. It's actually everyone. All people are. So let's get into it. First things first, welcome to CNN. I'm your host, Kurt Kennedy, the underdog. Let's go in. On this channel, we take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. All right, let's talk tariffs. Liberation Day. Libertad. Liberation Day. I was in Outer Banks with my sons when Liberation Day happened. And we're going to talk about tariffs. Oh, man. First of all, if any one of you who are watching this have lost money or are trying to retire and struggling with your 401k, put it in the chat, in the tape, so we can pray for you. Because I think I have a friend. I know some people who were hoping to retire and are now worried about that because the stock market is crashing. And if you don't know, 401ks and even 403bs, which are usually for nonprofits, they are all wrapped up in the state of the market. So even if you have like if you have one of those savings plans, like college savings plans for your kids, stuff like that, even those are being threatened right now. All right. So if you're really worried about it, let's pray for you. But we're going to talk tariffs. Here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to talk tariffs from the standpoint of politically what everyone's talking about. I'll make a couple of statements, but I want to talk about how to at least give some perspective on how to process all of this as a believer. So if you're not a believer, if you're looking to hear about tariffs, there's plenty of stations, and I'm going to give some thoughts and some stats, but there's plenty of places you can go to really get that. I do know some things, and I'll make it as simple as possible. But a lot of this is going to be, man, as a believer, how do I process all of this? Because I'm in the world and not of the world, but I don't want to ignore what's happening. And I can't pretend like, because, sometimes as believers, we think like, oh, because we're Christians, that the Lord is going to spare us from losing our jobs or losing it. Man, we don't know that. Listen, here's the one thing. If you're a believer and you read your Bible, the one thing you should know is that faith in God does not necessarily remove suffering. In fact, faith in God promises that. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to lose your job or something's going to happen, but it's just the reality. Just because we believe God is sovereign doesn't mean that we're not going to be affected in a way that hurts us negatively. That would be consistent with the Bible. Everyone from Joseph, who was sold into slavery, to John the Baptist, who's beheaded in prison. Everybody, they love God, they're loved by God, and they go through it. So we're not going to pretend like that's not the reality. But let's talk a little bit about tariffs. The problem, I'm not going to say anything really good about them. Here's the good thing about them. Here's what I'll say that's good. That if they are genuinely a negotiation tactic, because our trade deficit is ridiculous, like this is the first time I think in American history where our debt ratio, our debt ceiling is more than our GDP, our gross domestic like this is crazy, fam. Like we're in the trillions of dollars in debt, and it's fascinating. And this is the first time like where our GDP is lower than our trade, than our debt. That's ridiculous, right? So it's not like you can, and it costs, here's what's funny, what it called Murphy's Law. Here's what's incredible. It actually costs more than $1 to print $1. So you can't even print money out of it. You can't even make people who work for the mint to work overtime because it costs like $1 and like 47 cents for every dollar you print. So even if you print $1 trillion, you owe like $500 billion for just printing them, right? So we're in a real, but we don't always feel it because we're just kind of doing our thing, and we're allowed to, we notice it a little bit when gas prices go up or when the eggs are now $8 or all that stuff. If this is a negotiation tactic, it could work with some people. Say, hey, we're going to lower our tariffs if you lower your tariffs. We're going to do that. If that happens, okay. But in the meantime, Trump and those who are in support of this don't seem to be bothered by the amount of chaos and fear that this is happening. Trump, as a matter of fact, to your credit, your president and my president, this is what he put on his social media earlier today. He said the United States has a chance to do something that should have been done decades ago. Don't be weak. Don't be stupid. Don't be a panicking. In quotes, in parentheses, a new party based on weak and stupid people. This is the president. Let's keep in mind that this is the president of the United States saying, don't be weak, don't be stupid, don't be a panicking. A new party based on weak and stupid people. Be strong, courageous, and patient, and greatness will be the result. So this is our president telling us not to be weak and stupid. In other words, and this is the problem, this is the bigger problem with the tariffs, right? We'll talk about how to process this as a believer in a second. But here's the biggest problem with the tariffs. The people, our president is calling us stupid if we are struggling with what he's doing. And I just think I think that's stupid. Like, what are you talking about? It doesn't matter what happens in the short term. It's like the long term, like people are affected in the short term. You know, most of us don't have 5, 10K in the bank that if we lose our jobs, we have a couple years reserves. Most people do not have 6 months reserves in their bank that if something happens, they can still live and eat and provide for their family for 6 months. The vast majority of people don't have that. A small percentage of people do. And the people who don't have that are the ones who are the most affected. There are many people, whether you want to call it mismanagement, bad stewardship, or whatever, they live check to check. There's a lot of people, Christians, who live check to check and who are going to some degree, be concerned about what's happening to their 401k, what's happening to the tariffs and all of this stuff, right? So to call you stupid and weak for not trusting your president is pretty immature. It's pretty immature. I can't imagine. And again, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why it's crazy. Because when Joe Biden was on the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God, that's what he calls himself, Charlemagne the fraud as it relates to God, right? But when he said, you're not black if you don't vote for Joe Biden, man, the right did not let that go anyway. How dare you say that? And I was offended. I was like, man, who is Joe Biden? You know, this old white dude talking about you ain't black if you don't vote for him. Boy, I tell you, if I wasn't a believer, and there was a movie, there was a horror film called Shocker back in the day, and it was stupid, but the idea was good that the Shocker could go through. He got electrocuted, but didn't die, and got some power where he could travel through electricity, and he would come out the TV and snatch people, and it was crazy joint. The idea was crazy, but the movie was stupid. So don't go see it. I saw it, so you don't have to. But if I could have come through the screen like the Shocker, I'd have talked to Joe Biden face to face, right? What do you mean? But then you don't let that go. But then Trump calls you weak and stupid for doubt. So I think that's the actual problem. That's the real problem. That's one of the problems. So the tariffs are not Liberation Day in the sense that, oh, America's free. That will not come. If that even happens, that will come later on. Here's the other problem with the tariffs from the presentation of them. We're not even dealing with the actual reality of, like, prime example. So you already have a 24% tax tariff on China for something. Then you added another 30% in this new tariff. So that's 54% tariffs on China, who most of the stuff we have says made in China, right? There's so many. So you're going to go into what they call a trade war with China, right? We're not even going to talk about Canada, who is our biggest supporter economically. You know what? I just realized something. I don't even know if many of us understand the global reality of how income works, right? The global reality of why this is a big deal. Because there's no such thing as our country versus their country. That's not how it works. You know, back in the 90s is when the idea of globalism became a sort of a regular perspective, almost like a household manifesto, where before we all understood that some countries have certain minerals. The way that the Lord designed it was that countries like Africa has certain things, and China is able to make certain pharmaceuticals, and they're able to make certain computer chips, and we need those from them, and they need this from us. And so the way that the whole economy, the whole country works is through the giving of resources. This is how the world has always been. Long before there were these capitalism and socialism, you had these barter systems. You had these nations, you give. One of the reasons why China was the world power for so long is because they had gunpowder. They had a lot of stuff. So people needed gunpowder once people started using guns. And so you get this stuff from China, you trade them. It's always been about trade. The country revolves around trade. Well, after World War II, America's economy was strong because we helped put an end to World War II, to Hitler and all of them. And what happened was the America attached its financial stability to gold at the time. And for many reasons, there was a commission that happened. I think this was a commission. I want to say this happened in Michigan, or maybe it was Vermont. But there was a decision by world leaders to make the US dollar the world currency. And that gave us favor. This is why, like, America we can do a lot of stuff we want. This is why our military can be all over the world, but we would never let our enemy's military be in the Atlantic. They wouldn't be having those submarines down here in DC in the Bay. It wouldn't happen, right? But we're all over the place because the world needs us primarily because the US dollar is the global currency. Now, what I mean by that is not that everyone uses the dollar, but everything is compared to the US dollar. So when you go to another country, if you go to a country that doesn't have, like when we went to India, we had to get rupees, right? Well, they configure how much the rupees are worth in comparison to the dollar. This has always been the reality. Back in about 15, 20 years ago, remember when the euro came out, the European Union? Those countries decided to form their own currency to break away from the US dollar because the US, we have been able to be very dominant in the world economy because the US dollar is very serious. It's very strong. And that's just, it's the global economy in that sense. Well, about 2 years ago, China, Russia, Iran, some countries in Africa, and a few other nations decided to put their resources behind a financial currency that China was creating called the yuan, and basically trying to move away from being dependent on the US dollar, because in all honesty, the world revolves around currency, and the US dollar is the very center of it. This is why Osama bin Laden and the 9/11, why they attacked the World Trade Center, was one of the first things they attacked, right? They attacked the World Trade Center, the DOD, they wanted to hit America's money, America's defense, and then apparently they were going to the White House in that plane from Pittsburgh that ended up going down with those heroes who took over the plane. But the reason why, and Osama bin Laden said this, we attacked the World Trade Center because that represented America's financial stability. They understand that America is the world currency. And so when we make decisions in America, they affect the markets in the world. All right. So that's just a quick 30,000 foot simplistic view of why all of this matters, right? Is that the US dollar is still the global currency. And this is where, well, all the digital coin stuff, this is why it's been a fascinating, in many ways a failure, but for some ways a success venture. I remember last year they were talking about the US was working on its own own coin because they're trying to get into the digital world. It was a bunch of stuff. Everyone thought that by now the banks were going to shut down, and it was all this crazy stuff, right? But the reality is money makes the world go around. The global currency of the dollar is what affects the money. So when you make decisions about trade and you raise tariffs and say, we're going to charge you more, well, that affects everything and everyone. So, China is at 54% tariff. That means whenever goods are exported, when they we're going to charge 54% more, right? So if something used to cost $10, now it's going to cost $15.40, right? Well, China fired back and said, we're going to raise your tariffs 35%. So everything we get from China is going to be 35% more. You know who's going to get hit? Us. Most of you watching live or later, because we are the people that spend most of our income on goods. People who have a lot of money, they don't need to do that as much as we do. We spend most of our money on goods. You don't see. I bet you Bill Gates probably has never been to a Safeway or a Giant, at least in a long time, right? So I'm saying all this to make a point, is that what's happening with tariffs is when you say, I'm going to charge you whatever the percentage of the tariff is more to get our goods, you're going to pay more to get our goods, then those people aren't going to be able to buy them. Or they're going to say, well, then we're going to raise how much it costs to get your goods from us. And because the world needs each other's resources, it becomes a problem, becomes a big problem. In Trump's mind, America's been getting ripped off by this reality. And he thinks that by raising tariffs, it's going to make people either negotiate or we're just going to go to war. It's a trade war. We're just going to go to war with them, whatever that is, from an economic standpoint. This is a very simplistic overview because the point that I'm trying to make in this video is not all of this stuff, but I want to give you sort of a background so you can see where we're going. One of the main problems with this and what's being promised by the administration is sort of the same thing that trickle-down economics was promised. There was this idea that trickle-down economics was this idea that if you don't tax the rich, the people who make the most money, don't tax them, their money will go into the economy based on the jobs they provide, the businesses they own, and it will trickle down into middle America and so forth and so forth. I could show you an article right now that did a 50-year study on trickle-down economics and says that it never worked. In fact, this isn't the article I'm referring to, but this is one that I came across. We'll just read a little bit of it. This is in 2003. We've all heard the claims that cutting taxes for the richest Americans will improve the standard of living for the working class. Supposedly, top bracket tax breaks will result in more jobs being created, higher wages for the average worker, and an overall upturn in our economy. It's at the heart of the infamous trickle-down theory. The past 40 years have seen a gradual decrease and the top bracket's income rate from 91% in 1963 to 35% in 2003. It went as low as 28% in 1998, 1999 due to legislation passed under Reagan, the trickle-down theory's most famous adherent. Yeah, he was the king of trickle-down theory economics. The Clinton years, I'll get back to that. This is basically the point of the article. It's showing you cutting the top tax rate does not lead to economic growth. Cutting the top tax rate does not lead to income growth. And he just gives these graphs and stuff and he breaks it down, right? Cutting the top tax rate does not lead to wage growth. And fourth, cutting the top tax rate does not lead to job creation. This isn't the article I was talking about, but the point I wanted to make was that these things are promised as this will work, and what it actually does is it seems to create the what's it called, the idiom, the rich get rich and the poor get poor, right? So this is the reality. This idea of, it's like trickle down economics. We're supposed to believe that the tariffs will work, and maybe they will. But then here's the other problem though, like Trump doesn't have a good track record with telling the truth. This isn't about, like, I'm not a leftist at all. I've never voted Democrat in my life. So for those of you that are already either about to unsubscribe or thinking that I'm just woke, this isn't that. This is just common history. I mean, Trump has a history of lying and having failed business ventures, and that's just reality, right? That's just the reality. I mean, we could read this thing right here. Here, companies that filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 6 times, primarily due to over-leveraged hotel and casino. So this is the thing about Trump, right? Trump is good at over-leveraging his hand, right? So from the left, they'll be like, oh, this is the power of the kingpin. And this is basically, the left is going to say, listen, Trump's trying to make people bow and heel and kneel to him because they'll come to him and say, hey, what do we have to do for you to take the... And they're kind of true in that sense. That is true. And the right will claim it's a negotiation tactic. And that's true too if Trump is right and they're saying 50 countries have already, but that's not, those little countries like Vietnam and them, they're not the real problem, right? That's not the real issue. So both the left and the right are there. Here's the real problem. Here's what I think the real problem is. And this is what I think bigger picture what the Lord is doing. So as a believer, I'm a pastor, but I'm just a believer as well. This verse right here, I start off in almost every show. Take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. One of the things that I try to do with the Bible is I try to turn statements into questions, right? So when the whole Black Lives Matter and the woke versus the conservative and the left versus right, when all that was happening, I was always saying, okay, Lord, what are you exposing here? What are you trying to expose? Like, I get that. What are you doing? Or like 1 Peter 4, judgment begins in the household of God. Okay, Lord, what is judgment? What's happening here? What are you exposing about your people? That's how I always think. I don't just focus on what's happening here, because even if I go through tough times and grovel and all of that, I know that my faith in the Lord puts me in a better place eternally speaking. And eternity is forever. This place is only for as long as I'm going to be alive. So the two don't compete, right? So I'm always like, Lord, what are you trying to expose here? And here's what I think is the real problem with all of this. This isn't a political statement. There's a lot of problems with it, and it may pan out and Trump might be right. But here's the real problem, I think, and what the Lord is exposing. Here's the thing that we have to remember as believers. Now, I don't know what your eschatological viewpoint is. I don't know if you're dispensational premill, historic premill, if you're amill, if you're post-mill, whatever, right? This is all centered around the 1,000 years in Revelation 19. Do you believe that's a literal 1,000 years? And do you think that the rapture is going to happen before the 1,000 years? Do you think it's going to happen? There is no rapture. There is no literal 1,000 years like your amill. Do you think post-mill that all the stuff's going to happen after the 1,000-year? All of it's centered around that. I don't know your eschatological view and what you think, but here's what I would say. Revelation has shown us that the world is heading towards a considerable cataclysmic clash, right? And in that clash, in some way, shape, or form, regardless of your eschatology, your end times view, whatever you think the end times is going to happen, we know that the Bible, at least in Revelation, shows a lot of turmoil is going to happen. And that there's going to be someone who apparently is the Antichrist who will gather the world together and get people to trust him. And then, and if the time frames are literal, it's a 7-year period. With the first 3.5, it seems like everything is good. The last 3.5 are the worst ever. And if you think the church is gone, but Israel's, whatever it is, most people believe something like this is going to happen. That the Lord, we're getting prepared for a cataclysmic clash of good versus evil. And somehow, those of us who believe in the Lord are going to suffer. We're going to feel it. There's the mark of the beast. You can't, all of this stuff, right? We have to remember that. This isn't a specific eschatological view I'm talking about. Just the grand picture that Revelation paints wherever you're at is that the world is coming to a cataclysmic clash where that's going to lead to the return of Christ and the end of Satan's rule and all that stuff that's happening here. But the world is going to get very, very evil and under Satan's rule authoritatively in ways that we haven't seen yet, that will then provide the way for Christ to come back, depending on your eschatological view. Even if you're Amil, like you don't believe there's a literal 1,000 years, but it's the age of the church, it's still going to get a lot worse than what we see now, okay? You have to have some category in your mind of what Revelation has said is going to take place before Christ returns. With that being said, here's what I think the real problem is from that standpoint. We could get into the politics and all that, but here's a real problem, I think, that's more biblical. So Trump right now is being touted by conservative Christians and by himself as a Christian. Yet he has Paula White, who is arguably a heretic. Arguably. I don't know her. I don't follow her ministry, but I've seen some things. I just watched her try to sell, have people sow a seed of money as Easter's approaching to get. I was like, what are you talking about? But it's just wild. So I think Paula White is arguably not a genuine Christian. At least most Christians don't think she is. I'm not making a statement about her conversion. I just don't see the fruit. I think there's concerns for her for reality. He makes her the face of Christianity. I think God is saying, look, pay attention. This is the people that you're saying, right? All Trump talks about is money and all the things that 1 John 2 says is what it means to love the world. The boasting of the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the boasting what he has and does. I've talked about this in previous videos, right? Here's what I think is actually happening. And there's no verse I can proof text this, but this is what I think is happening. Just you walk with the Lord for a while, you see things play out. And I believe that Revelation is going to come to pass in some way, shape, or form. You know, this is an eschatology, so I'm not going to get into my position, but I believe it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form. This is what I think is happening. And I think there's two things I think are happening. One, eschatologically, one to America. First, America. I think the American church, America, is the least persecuted church in redemptive history. I think it's the least persecuted group of believers in redemptive history. In other words, we just have been, and America has done a lot of evil things in the name of Jesus, right? In the year of our Lord, have done some evil things. But America is not persecuted greatly. In fact, America is so not persecuted for their character, for their faith in Christ. It's been so long that many Americans view things like taking my First Amendment right as a persecution, taking my Second Amendment rights to have as a persecution. They think that's impinging on because America is not persecuted in the biblical sense for loving and living for Jesus, that the faith of many Christians in America has been syncretistically connected with the political world. And so it's called theolitical is what I call it. So much of Christians in America process persecution through the weakest lenses. I mean, we just talked about 70 Christians being beheaded in Africa. You got Christians in Asian countries. There are pastors who go to preach in China. They go to every Sunday with a suitcase because the authorities might come in and arrest them and their wives and take them away. And they have to have arrangements made. There's a persecution that God says in 2 Timothy 3:12, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. So God himself right before 2 Timothy 3:16 about the word of God is inspired and is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching and training in righteousness and rebuking and all this, right? Right before that, 4 verses before that, he says, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. America is the least persecuted group of believers in the history, apart from a small period of time when Rome in the 4th century decided to make Christianity a protected religion and allow Christianity to become eventually by the Romans, the Roman Catholic Church and so Catholicism, right? But as a country, American Christians aren't really persecuted. Not really. But the rest of the world, they'll get their heads cut off, right? It's just reality. I think the Lord is allowing a lot of what Donald Trump is doing as a professed Christian, mind you. I don't believe Donald Trump is a Christian at all. And I'm not being judgmental, but you judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. I think being discerning, we have to be wise as serpents and shrewd as doves. Innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. I don't think he's a believer. And if that offends people, then be offended. I'm okay with that. I'm not trying to offend anyone. This is my perspective. If you don't, this is a YouTube channel. But the reality is, I think because he's professing to be a believer, I think he's not. I think he puts a woman who many conservatives who voted for him, and I watched some of their videos, they all like, why did you put her there? She's a heretic. They think she's a heretic. She's not a real believer. I think demons are going to have their way with her in eternity unless she really turns to repent. They're saying, and they're defending him as a Christian. I think God is going to allow Donald Trump's actions to make the world be more hateful towards Americans and then Christians, because he's saying he's a Christian and he's making a lot of things that are religious freedom as if that's really like we're really being persecuted. Like we're just not being persecuted. We live in a democratic society. Many Christians can go to any public place, have a Bible study, open their Bibles and read without any concern, or maybe you get kicked out from the most liberal place and what persecution that is. But I feel like godliness comes with persecution. So if you're the least persecuted group of Christians, then godliness may be hard for you to come by. And the biblical perspective is that Jesus, from the time Jesus started his ministry, from the time Jesus walked out of the wilderness and being tempted by Satan, went into the synagogue, unrolled the scroll and read from Isaiah, and then said, this scroll is fulfilled in your hearing, he's been persecuted. A lot of people, there's a lot of like YouTube channels that go at like false prophets and all these things, and they think they're flipping over tables like Jesus. But if you really look at the scriptures, Jesus didn't go after the Pharisees. They came after him. It was always them trying to ask him a question to trip him up. And then he would push back with a question or do something, right? He would show that they're frauds. But Jesus was persecuted, and the godliness he brings it is dead. Like to be like Jesus is to be persecuted for living righteous, not for having your rights denied or for being a jerk. And then people. So what you get is a fake Christian who's a president, who promotes a possible fake Christian who's the face of Christianity in America. That is, I think, evidence of God's judgment. But then you get the world is watching this because again, the U.S. dollar, people may love or hate America, but they need the U.S. dollar to be stable because it will affect the stability of their currency, because the rest of the world's currency is tied to the U.S. dollar. No question. So they watch what we say and do. And what Trump is doing, because Trump, I think he does think he is like Kanye. Remember when Kanye was like, well, the Lord told me that I got to do great things for God. I got to make God do, God doesn't need you to do none of that, So I think there's this power trip. I think there's an arrogance about Trump. And I think he likes saying that I can cause this. I can do this. I think what's happening for America believers is that we're going to be persecuted, not because of we're going to lose our jobs. Those are suffering. That's not persecution. Persecution is specific suffering because you believe in Jesus. We're not talking about those things. Those are different things. We could lose our 401ks. That's everyone's going to happen. What I think the Lord is doing is helping the world and even non-Christians in this country get offended at Trump and for the Christians that put him in office. That's why I hate every time he tries to promote Christianity. I can't stand it, because I don't think it's genuine. But it's setting us up to be. I think that's what the Lord's doing. I think he's setting us up because we're too distracted. We care about everything else but holiness. We care about everything else but honoring the Lord. We care about all these other things, and I think we're so distracted. And I genuinely believe, as much as I hate saying this because it could happen, I genuinely think that persecution might be the only thing that actually it's going to purify the church. You're going to have no choice but to focus up instead of out. And this is what's happening. And I feel like the Lord is allowing Trump to do these things. This isn't even about the economy to the Lord. What does he care about? He said, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool, right? The earth is his footstool, fam. The Lord is sitting on the throne, and his left leg and the earth is just rotating under his left foot. Like, the Lord isn't tripping off the economy, right? But I think it's going to set in motion a hatred towards American Christians within our own country, right? But then also in the global economy. The one thing that no one is talking about that I think is going to experience as a result of these tariffs, I think international travel for America is going to shut down, which is going to also affect the global economy because Americans are not going to feel safe. We're going to start being warned, don't go to this country, don't go to that country. People are going to be leaving because they don't feel safe, because other people are angry at Americans. And if you're a Christian, you're going to be, they're going to be looking for them. I think this is going to happen. I'm not saying this with joy or glee, even though I do think, persecution and godliness are connected. I'm saying it because I've been saying this for years, but I just see it. It seems like it's more and more happening. So on one side, I think the real problem is that the church needs to get ready and prepare for what I think is going to be a hatred towards us, whether you voted for Donald Trump or not, because he's professing to be a Christian. He has a fake Christian as the face of Christianity in America, who's telling people that she's going to give you a what is it, what is it, not diamond, but like a crystal cross from Israel. Them things is probably $3 that you paying $100-something for, right? All this stuff is happening. It's a mockery of who God is. It's just an utter mockery. Let me tell you something. Things like a woman's right to choose and LGBT, all those things, yeah, they're a mockery of God in one sense because they go against the created order. They go against what God created. They go against how God created mankind to be and how children are supposed to be. That's a mockery. But Christians focus. What's a greater mockery, right? When you look in the Bible, it talks about this thing with the abomination of desolation, right? This idea that it's like sexuality, a woman's right to choose, people making decisions, drug use, all these things, they're sin. And so in that sense, but what mocks God the most, or what God hates the most, is when you profess to be with God, from God, and you do the opposite of God. That's more of a mockery to him, biblically speaking. That's way more. And some people who are conservatives are going to be offended at this, because I'm going to say that I think what Donald Trump is doing as a fake Christian, or Paul the White, people who do that, is more of a mockery to God than what we call abortion. I think it is. You know why? Because that was happening with Molech, and people were throwing their kids and all of that. God didn't say anything about it really until Israel started to worship those gods and do that. That's when it became a problem to God, because you're worshiping another God. That's when it became a big deal to God. I think what's happening, the greatest mockery, the thing that Jesus was the most angry at, he wasn't angry at the adulterous woman in John 8. He wasn't angry at the adulterous woman. Now, he didn't call the adulterous woman, but the woman at the well he said, "You're right. The man you're with is not your husband, and neither were the ones that you've been with before." Like, he didn't say you adulterous. He didn't say that to her. He wasn't offended by that. In fact, she went back to Samaria, told everyone, and then and people got saved. He went down there for 2 days. You know who he was offended at? The Pharisees. He never called a non-Pharisee a hypocrite. He didn't say that, but he said to the Matthew 23. Read that when you get a chance. He says hypocrite like 7 or 8 times in that chapter alone. What offends God more than like just sin is the fakeness of those who profess to believe and those who misuse that. Take his name in vain. Taking his name in vain is not saying Jesus Christ. That's not what taking his name in vain means. Taking his name in vain means saying you believe in him and then living a life that's opposite of it. It has nothing to do with just saying Jesus Christ. It has to do with saying you believe in him but living like you don't. That's a greater mockery to God. And this is what a lot of the problem is in the American church. If you don't believe me, go read the 7 letters of Revelation. 5 of those letters, he said, I have a problem with you. I have a problem. Only 2 he had no problem with. 5 he had a problem with. These were all churches, people who believe, professing believers. What offends God more than the political tropes that people throw out? What offends God more than the things that they think are, Black Lives Matter? What offends God is when you take his name in vain and you say you believe in him and you don't and you mock him. And God's going to bring punishment to that. There's going to be judgment to that. I think that's happening in the current administration right now. And that's going to trickle down. That's the trickle down economics that we're going to see. That's going to trickle down to the average churchgoer where people are going to start being way more offended. And persecution is going to come, and that's going to make us godlier because we're going to have to press in and pray more than we have before. That's one side of it. Along with that, the other thing I think the real problem is I think what's happening with Trump, I look at it as, yeah, you're right, Trump. I do believe that the Lord is using you. I believe the Lord is using Donald Trump in this time, but not in the way Donald Trump thinks. He is the, you know what? He is the president America needs, should have, if you're going to evaluate America's spiritual condition. Donald Trump is the right president for the spiritual condition of America. There's so many Christians now who I watch on YouTube, and they have these big platforms. And I think they have bigger platforms. And you know what's funny? The bigger platform, the more you think like and I'm not saying there are no Christians that have big platforms that aren't genuine, for sure. There are some. I'm friends with some of those guys. But a lot of people, I just think their platforms, to them, they just kind of think like they can say and do whatever and not care about the things like you don't think God cares about you loving your neighbor anymore? Like you think God doesn't care about that because the politics, because the left says this or the right? You don't think God cares about that anymore? Like you really don't think that Jesus cares about people who are religious, who are consistently not struggling with sin, not fighting it and sometimes giving in, which we all do, but talking about Christians who are renegotiating, redefining what sin is. Do you know something? This is off topic for a second. Do you know that when it talks about in Psalms and all over the place, like fear the Lord, it doesn't mean be afraid of the Lord. It means be in awe of the Lord, right? Do you realize that that is an actual command, not a suggestion? To fear the Lord, to be in awe of the Lord, right? Hebrews tells us this. Hebrews 12 tells us this. Hebrews 12 says this, right? What is it? 28 and 29. Hebrews 12, right? It says, let us be grateful that we have been given a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And let us offer to God worship in fear and awe, right? Because our God is a consuming fire. Being in awe of God is a biblical command. And the vast majority of Christians are not even convicted that they're not in awe of God at all. And I'm to my shame, the majority of my Christian life, I've never been convicted of not being in awe of God. This is a recent thing in the last 2 years for me, and I'm ashamed of it. We're supposed to grow. We're supposed to be in awe of the Lord. We're supposed to grow in the, but like Psalm 106:20, it says they exchanged the glory of God for an image of an ox that eats grass, is what we do all the time. The Lord wants his people to be in awe of him, and he can't even convict us of that because we're not even dealing with the students of the flesh. We're still dealing with porn, all this other stuff. We're still dealing with politics and judging people and being bitter. We're not even thinking about being in awe of God, and that's an actual command. I'm trying to get to the point by his grace where I'm convicted of being not being in awe of him and want to be transformed because of his majesty. But the vast majority of the church doesn't even think about that. And I'm not saying this self-righteously because I've been in that camp for a long time. And it's crazy to me that people care about all these other things and are not in awe of the God you want to spend eternity with. So I think the Lord is letting all this happen. Letting all this happen so that Christians we're going to be more persecuted, and godliness comes with persecution, according to 2 Timothy 3:12. But I also think, in an eschatological view, that God is shaping the world to grow in its animosity towards the church, a deeper animosity towards Christians, because now people who probably didn't struggle with Christians, as Donald Trump is associated with Christianity and makes all these wild decisions. Listen, man, the world is different, man. The world still needs America, but things are changing. Remember, the world is heading towards a cataclysmic clash. This is not going to just be, okay, everything is just good and Jesus, and then he just comes back. It's going to be some drama. And I think that the church is going to feel it. And I think God is using Donald Trump, definitely, but not in the way Donald Trump thinks. I don't think he's using him to bring reform in the way that he thinks. I think he's using him to bring the storm. Because I think through Donald Trump, and then this dude's talking about trying to run for a third term. My buddy was like, "Oh, he's just trolling." I don't think he's trolling. I don't think Donald Trump troll. He trolls when he says, "Don't be stupid," but I think he is that blind, that immature, and that arrogant enough to pursue these things. I think he really believes that he can. And this is only like a couple months in. My dudes, we don't even know if you've done a good job that you would win the vote. This dude already is. This is the arrogance of this dude. He is the perfect president for the state of the spiritual condition of America right now. And to be honest with you, America's spiritual condition has never really been good. Let's just be honest. You can't decimate the second greatest commandment through slavery, the oppression of women, the decimation of the Native Americans, and all these other people, and use the Bible to do it and think that this is the thing that people don't realize about God. What was a long time ago? Remember when Jesus said, "Look, the men of Nineveh are going to rise up and judge this generation." Remember that? He said because they repented at the sign of Jonah, but something greater than Jonah said. In other words, he said people from a long time ago are going to look at, they're going to judge this generation. God does not think that happened a long time ago. He says that happened. Whenever the Revelation 20 happens and the books are open, people are going to be judged by God for things that happened centuries ago, millennia ago. Crazy. That happened 2,000 years ago, and the books are being opened, and the Lord doesn't care about how long ago it happened. It happened. And I think we are living in we've inherited from our forefathers, the Christians that came before us, not all, but many, a gospel that does not pride itself on righteousness, but on being right. Not right versus righteousness. It's about economic stability. It's about love for country. That's why it says, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, right? And to the republic, which is one nation under God, is way later. It's way later. The flag is not more, but this is the country we live in. If you talk like this, some Christians will get offended. And it's like, that's actually the problem. Because you care more about the red from the red, white, and blue than the red from the blood that was shed for you. And this is why I think this is happening. Now, this doesn't change any economic situation. I'm not here to tell anyone who's going to go through it or going through it economically that, hey, you're going to be okay. I mean, ultimately, sure, but in the meantime, we might feel it. As a pastor, my money comes from the giving of my church and not on some Marvin Sapp either. You know what I'm saying? I ain't never told the church elders, lock the doors. Lock the doors. I ain't never said that, except I was joking last Sunday. Not this past, last Sunday I was messing with the church because that clip came out. My giving comes from, so I love it when people give when you guys give, it's incredible to me. From $1 to $100, whatever. Some of you go on Venmo, you go on Cash. I'm grateful because my giving comes from the church. If they lose their jobs, they can't give, and then I'll lose this house and my kids, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. It would be terrible. We'll figure it out. But my greatest concern is not what happens to me economically. It's what happens to me eternally. And I think many believers, if they're being honest, just don't care about that anymore. They just think that God doesn't care because of, listen, I think, I'm going to end with this. And I've said this before, but I'm going to end with this. James 3:1 says this. It says this, not many of you should presume to be teachers, my brothers, because we know that we will be judged with a stricter judgment. So James is saying men like me are going to receive a stricter judgment from God because we're teachers. We know truth, so we're supposed to live it. So if my life, it doesn't honor the Lord, and I have weaknesses, but that doesn't mean I don't honor the Lord. But if my life doesn't, God says, I'm going to get a stricter judgment. But here's the thing. It says stricter. So it'll be stricter for me. So you know what that means? Judgment's going to be strict for everyone. It's just for people who are teachers. I just think, man, people are not taken seriously. Like, the Lord is not playing, fam. I just, his grace is amazing, but it's not that amazing. We can just do whatever. And it's just like, hey, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think many believers will be like those in 1 Corinthians 7 or Matthew 7. I did this, I did that. I'll never forget this guy. I watched the first near-death testimony or whatever that I saw. It was the most believable story. It was an African dude who was talking about, he was the judge. He described it in such vivid detail. This was one of the first ones I watched. And his was seeing God in the throne, and it was that almost a Revelation 20 scene where books were opened, and he would talk to the people, and then he would say, "Depart from me," and they would get sucked into this hole that was like burning hot. And the dude was like crying. He was like, "Man, it happened so fast that the voice yelled like 10 seconds after they were already gone." That's how fast they got sucked out. And he was saying, and I'll never forget this. He said there was a woman that was in front of him that went, and the Lord asked her some questions. And then he said to her, "I'm not going to judge you for what you did, what you said, but I'm going to judge you for the impact that what you said had on all the people that followed you," right? Because she was apparently a popular Christian, whatever, and she went astray and said negative things, and the Lord set her to eternal judgment for that. And again, that's just an anecdotal story. But I do think Jesus is more loving than we imagined, but more firm than we imagined as well. And I think that strict judgment that everyone's going to get is going to shock a lot of people when they stand before him. Because many of us, we don't care. We don't even care about, we're not even convicted about doing things that Jesus died for. So I think all of this is happening. The tariffs are really tearing. It's going to tear a lot of the confidence and hope in the world, but it's also going to tear a lot of the restraint against believers. I think so. But what do I know? This is just my thought. But yeah, my bad for being gone for a week. I was on whatever it was. I always lose people when I don't go. I'll never get to 5,000, but I'm good with what I'm saying. So anyway, appreciate y'all. I'm back. I was just chilling with my boys on vacation. There's a lot to talk about for real, but I just wanted to get this out there. Grace and peace.